Welcome to the Business Trendsetter podcast, where we talk about trends and how to use them to grow your business. My name is Manny Turan.
And I'm Adam Hartung.
We are Spark Partners. We're here to give you insights and help you to grow your business by truly understanding your customer. Customers, of course, are the foundation, the bedrock of why you're in business. And in order to understand your customers, one of these things we talk about a lot about at Spark Partners is demographics. You can say that's one of our gongs that we can constantly, almost like the bass drum, is demographics, demographics, demographics. And the reason why, and it really dictates and it shows you where, how, and who is moving where, how, and who. I mean, this is very foundational to business. And one thing that was very interesting for me, Adam, when you and I first met a number of years ago, is when I learned that you moved from Chicago. You were kind of closing a chapter in your life. You were moving on to another chapter, and you looked at the map of the U.S. and you made you asked yourself some questions, and then you looked at demographics and you decided to move to Las Vegas for certain reasons. So walk us through that mindset, kind of where you were with the Chicago, and then what made you move to Vegas. And then I want to use that as a springboard to talk about all these other things happening with regards to demographics in today's market.
Sure. So I moved to Chicago. I guess it's now been, 40 years ago, and 35 anyway. But the reason I moved to Chicago when I finished the Harvard Business School was specifically the idea that Chicago was the center of the country. And in those days, you go back to the 80s and 90s, when you did business with people, you had the option of the phone or the fax, or you did it in person. And we did a lot more in person back in those days, going to meet people, trying to negotiate deals, close the deals, all that kind of stuff. And I had been in consulting for a long time. And I also knew that if I was going to be in consulting, I needed to be able to have contact with my clients. And what Chicago offered me was I could get up early in the morning and I could catch a morning flight to New York or Boston or DC. I could go to Cleveland, Ohio, or I could go just Atlanta. And I could get there in a very short period of time, hour and a half. I could have a day of meetings and catch a flight home. Likewise, although people didn't recognize it, I could do the same thing to Denver, or I could do it to, say, Phoenix, or I could do it to California, because with the time difference, I could get up in the morning, I could catch an early flight, I could land in California, I could work all day and get what we call a red eye back to Chicago, getting me back in the wee hours of the morning. And that was really important, right? And so businesses grew, and for most of the time I lived in Chicago, the city itself grew. It landed a few headquarters. Yes, it was losing some manufacturing jobs, but everybody was losing manufacturing jobs. And the economy was doing quite well until we had the Great Recession. And when the Great Recession hit, real estate values in Chicago fell by about 50%. It was an enormous hit. And then after the Great Recession, they did not come back. Nothing. It was the worst performing real estate market in the United States. Probably Detroit was worse, but it had been falling off everybody's schedule because it had started to do so bad long before the Great Recession hit.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting there saying to myself, okay, my house lost a lot of value. Am I just going to stay here in Chicago, or I want to try to do something better and have things work out better for me? And I, at that point, didn't have any children in school. That was also a major issue. Often when you have children, you're less likely to move for family reasons, just that simple. And I discovered that, in fact, something like 80% of people never move more than 50 miles away from where they're born and raised. And
Right.
that's because people get connected to family and they make relationships. And certainly I lived in Chicago so long, I knew every back road. I knew how the city worked. I knew where to go get the cheap tires. I had a contractor's list for everything. I got a guy for just about everything. So it was an easy life. But I knew that if I stayed there, I was going to have limited fortunes because the city and the state were doing terribly. I'd written some blogs for Forbes in which I pointed out that the economy was not doing well, raft of reasons, but the economy was not doing well. People were not moving to Chicago. Businesses were not moving to Chicago. It was going the opposite direction. And I said, okay, I'm too young to think about retirement. I don't want to do that. I don't want to quit. And I want to be able to continue to work. I want to have a successful consulting career. Where do I go? And so the first thing I realized is that, as my friend Buckley Brinkman, who runs a big business for the National Institute of Science and Technology, a manufacturing extension partnership in Wisconsin, he always reminds me that ever since man invented air conditioning, people have been moving south. And I'm not sure it was just air conditioning, also the change in manufacturing that had kept people north where we were making steel and factories worked, and it was better to be in a cool area for that. But the whole there'd been a migration south. Okay, simple enough. So now what am I going to do? Move to Texas, move to Florida, move to the south, move to Arizona. I mean, how do you do this? And I sat down and I took a look at it and I said, well, what do I want to know? Well, first of all, I want to go to a growing economy. I want a state with a growing economy. That took a lot of states out of contention, right? Because there were a lot of states that were not doing as bad as Illinois, which was terrible, but their economies were pretty flat. Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia. Georgia was a little bit growth, but not South Dakota. There were a lot of. I mean, sorry, South Carolina. There were a lot of places that the economy just wasn't growing that fast. I said, no, I need a growing economy because I want to make sure there's plenty of people working. And one of the two of the fastest growing economies were Nevada and Arizona. They just outperformed. I mean, Texas was in there as well, but Nevada and Arizona just stood out. And then the second thing I took a look at is what's the average age? What I didn't want to do is move to some place where population was growing, but it was a bunch of retirees. Because as we pointed out again and again,
Yes.
retirees
Mhm.
are a drain on the economy. They don't produce, instead they consume. And so what I didn't want is be amongst a bunch of consumers where now you didn't have people, you didn't have a growing economy, you didn't have a business base that was keeping up with it with taxes to support that older economy, and with demographics pulling younger people in who were going to work and do healthcare and all the jobs that we needed. And when we got to that, Nevada just beat everybody. There was just no question about it how well Nevada was doing. It had this very fast growing economy, but it had a very very fast growing population, and they were mostly young people. And I did just a few like typical, like always talk about doing first person research. I went to Las Vegas and I went not to the big expensive casinos, but I went around to places where there were people were coming from out of town, like the downtown area and I started to sort of just bump into people and I'd say, hi, how are you? And do you live here? And when I would bump into people who live there, like servers in a restaurant or something like that, I would ask them, I said, what brought you to Las Vegas? I mean, it is hot there. It is very, very hot there. It's like Phoenix, 110 degrees in the summer. So it's not the easiest place to live because of
Yeah.
that
At
extreme
least
heat.
half the year.
Yeah, and there's some things about it that are expensive. Water is very expensive in Arizona and in Nevada, and so and what happened was I would talk to young person after young person, and there was one person who characterized it. She said she lived in the greater Los Angeles area. She had come to Nevada on a holiday. She was visiting with some friends that lived there, and they started talking about living. And she said, I realized for the first time in my life I could own both a car and pay my rent. And it struck me because I realized that the vast difference there was just 4 hour drive between the Los Angeles area and Las Vegas meant that people could have a very, very dramatically different lifestyle.
Yeah.
Young people, if they were in Nevada. So if you're going to work in the hospitality industry, hotels, entertainment. Both markets have those kinds of things. Or if you're going to be working as a server or something like that, the reality was you're going to make about the same amount of money in California that you're going to make in Nevada, but you're going to be able to afford possibly to even buy a house, and not just rent, but buy a house, and you could have an easier lifestyle with a lot less commuting and some of the other problems that exist in LA. And so I knew that the factors were working very, very much in favor of Las Vegas continuing to grow. It would pull people from California. It wasn't as big as Phoenix and the Phoenix Tucson corridor, which attract a lot of people and attract a lot of business. And I thought, okay, so from the smaller base, it has the opportunity to double much better than Phoenix does.
Right.
The next thing was that the water issues were not nearly as bad because there weren't nearly as many people in Nevada as there were in Arizona. So the water issues would inevitably hit Nevada, but it was going to take a lot longer. So all of that came down to where do I want to go? I want to go someplace where there's young people, attracting business, and the economy is growing so that as I aged, I could age into this gracefully. And it worked out very, very well. Between
Hmm.
the time I purchased the land and started building my house, it took 2 years to build a house there, to build in Vegas. In that 2 years, values went up, about 20%, which I thought was, well, that's incredible.
Hmm.
I even moved into the house; it was worth more than it cost me. And then after I'd been in it for 5 years, the assessment came back that it doubled in value. And
That's
so
amazing.
and why? Well, because it was a growing town. At the same time, I look back at what was happening in Chicago, and it's happened since. And you don't see much growth in the value of the real estate. And why? Well, because they're not attracting people, right? And so I think this is important. If you're sitting there and you're saying, well, okay, you're a boomer, where do you want to retire? and a lot of people want to retire in Florida. And going to say if that's your ambition in life, well, I'm not going to stop you. It is the gateway to South America. If you speak Spanish in particular, and you can have contacts in South America, or you could do business, then you probably have some interesting opportunities down there. But you're going to find that when you go places, most of the people around you are going to retire. The
Yeah.
population of Florida is almost a third of the people are retirees. They're over 65 years old. So kind of think about that. One out of every three people is retired. That's a lot of people that are having to pull on the tax base, right?
Yeah.
And what does it also mean? If you're there, a young family, you're not going to be attracted because older people vote against school bonds all the time. Older people don't want to have to pay teachers more. Old people don't care about Disney World, and we've seen a big fight there where the mayor's trying to pull the big tax break that was given to the Disney Corporation for building Disney World. He's pulling that away from them so that he can try to get more tax dollars, right? And the older people are like, fine, because they don't want to pay taxes, and so they don't sit there and think to themselves, well, what happens if we lose the tourist trade? Because they're
Right.
not working, they just see an opportunity to try to tax Disney more. So there's definitely a downside to moving into that sort of an environment, and you better be sure that for whatever is pulling you there, you got enough money that you can make it out the other side.
Yeah. And what's interesting about I mean, we're using this example of you moving to Las Vegas and the decisions you made for that. But this is equally the same for where to market a product or service. If you're a business and you have something you're selling, you've got to look at the same demographics. And the demographics are going to showcase whether you're selling to a school system, for instance, or retirees. If you're selling something that's a luxury item marketed towards retirees, then maybe Florida is the best place to not necessarily move your operation, but put some ad dollars in that domain. Find a
Well,
partner on the boots on the ground and things of that nature. So demographics are way more important. And it's not necessarily a snapshot. What I like about demographics, it isn't like a balance sheet that just shows you in time what's happening. I mean, it kind of is in one way, but then you've got to look at the P&L side, and you have to look at the forward looking side of where are people moving to, where is there a net positive or a net negative population, and why. I mean, we've got major economies like Japan. We've talked about Italy, and then of course African nations are on the other side of the spectrum where they're having 7, 8, 9 kids is the norm, versus in Italy it's like 1.1, 1.09, 1.08. The US is 1.9, 2.0. So we've got some issues down the road. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that, Adam?
well, let's tie the domestic to the international. Let's kind of make that tie first. So you were doing some research and you sent me along some articles, Manny. And one of those, what it pointed out was that today in the United States, 18% of the population is of retirement age. That's the entire United States. That's 1 in 5. That's a pretty dramatic number. So those people out there that haven't recognized that need to. It's why employers are complaining so much about employees, they're constantly in need of trying to get more employment. It also explains why, despite the Fed's best effort to create a recession, doing everything they possibly could, using monetary policy when it absolutely had no impact other than raise costs, you still have a burgeoning a problem hiring people. It's because there just
Right.
aren't the people there because too many people retiring. But Maine is the oldest populations are in Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, um, West Virginia, and Florida. Those are the five with the highest density of retirees. In both Maine and Florida, it far exceeds 20%. It said Florida is nearly 30%. The issue in Maine is not that really people are retiring there so much as people don't leave. And so the aging population has caught up with them. They haven't attracted young people, they haven't attracted business to Maine. In the case of Florida, of course, they have a lot of migrants, meaning people from other
Right.
states are moving to Florida. So you start saying, well, okay, that's the trend, that's where it's going, but is that a trend that's good for us? Is it good for the economy? Um, and if we take a look, that's where we can sort of bridge internationally and start saying, well, what's happened internationally in terms of birth rates? And what we know is that China's had a big problem. They've had a total population decline now year over year, absolutely proven. So even the domestic Chinese data sets say that they've had a reduced population. We think it's probably happened for 3 consecutive years, but we know for a fact it happened last year. Births were down 10% in China last year. Just think about that. Births are down 10%. Now, they've had for a decade, they've been pushing to try to have people have more children by offering incentives with
Right.
free childcare and even money and tax deductions and all kinds of things. And it isn't working, right? It isn't helping them get there. So the result is that today the population of India is larger than the population of China, right? So what we can say that's once those trends set in, what happens is that let's take for example Maine. If you got an aging population, you're not attracting young people, then you don't have more people of the age to have children, right? So your birth rate was declining. It's the decline accelerates because there's
Right.
nobody there of the right age to have children. And so if you don't have some kind of a policy to turn that around, then what's going to happen is that the inherent ability of the economy to survive is going to keep shrinking and shrinking. The aging will get higher, it'll go beyond 20, 30, 40, 50% of the population. When you get to those sorts of numbers, you have to realize how difficult it is to get services, how difficult it's going to be to have nursing care, how difficult it's going to be just to get dental care and that kind of thing.
Yep.
It starts to get quite difficult. And then we're seeing that already happen in China is now so desperate that we're seeing, them make, saber rattling about, taking over Taiwan or doing
Right.
other very drastic acts in order to try to get their population to increase. The Europe's population has declined for 2 years in a row. And so now we know that, okay, the only thing that has kept their population base stagnant has been immigration. They've had an enormous immigration program, bringing people in across the Mediterranean Sea for a decade. They've worked very, very hard at. They've opened the doors up, especially places like Germany. Yet Germany's population growth for the last 4 years has been just under 1%. And that includes all the immigrants that they've taken into the country. But had they not done that, their economy would have essentially failed. They would have gone into a tailspin. So the only thing that's kept their economy vibrant, growing at all, and being somewhat successful has been bringing in immigrants. So it fundamentally, at the end of the day, if you don't have people coming into where you live, then prices can't go up, right? Your real estate prices can't go up.
Yeah.
Your services can't go up. And I've been reading lately about there's crises in California where some of the communities are getting older, and because your roads in the community are largely paid for by your local taxes, then there's this thing called Proposition 13 that was instituted when Ronald Reagan was governor. That's how long ago. We're talking 40 plus years ago.
Wow.
They passed Proposition 13 to the Constitution, and what it did was it limited the ability of localities to raise property taxes. So somebody could own their home, they could have bought it 40 years ago, and their property tax would have gone up negligibly for 40 years. So
Hmm.
now then who's paying for the roads, right? You start to have to. There is nobody paying for the roads.
Yeah.
Is what it
Nobody
comes
is.
down to. So you end up with a problem, with a lot of potholes, and you end up with a lot of inability to keep the streets and the sewers and the water supply and all that stuff affected, working properly. So that's a big California problem because it's not attracting people. It's before various reasons. In their case, it's not the weather. It's more a matter, I think, of the taxation and some of the business issues. It's the largest economy, second largest economy in the U.S., tied right up there with New York, but it struggles. It's
Yeah. It
struggling
does.
because of the fact it's not attracting more people. Um, Let me give you kind of some information here that might make sense to you.
Okay.
The highest GDP growth rates, this is gross domestic product, economy, the highest growth rates in the last since 2013. Okay. India's number one at a consistent 6% per year. And why? Babies. Their
Lots of
population is
babies. Lots of
growing,
people.
lots of babies, lots of people, lots of opportunity to grow. And they're by far and away the best performing economy. If we take China, in 2013, it grew at 7%. In 2018, it was 6%. In 2023, it was 5%. And
So it's
now the
declining in
projection for
growth.
2028 is 3%. Why? Because the population is stagnating. So we can start to project now what's happening in China. Well, now you can sit there and say, what's going to happen where I live? And do I want to
Right.
stay where I live, or should I go? Do I want my business to be here, or is it more likely to be successful someplace
Right.
else? And recently, in the when they passed the Inflation Reduction Act, it put a boatload of money out there for people to do things like build chip plants, for
Right.
example, and get
Exactly.
into the building charging, like EV charging stations and things like that. And one of the things we've seen is it's been very difficult for states like Minnesota and Wisconsin to get some of those things going because people are saying, well, how are you going to get the employees? how are you going to get the talent, to run
Hmm.
these plants, and how are you going to get the people to work in them? It's very, very, it's a manufacturing operation, but we're talking, a very,
Pretty
it's,
massive scale. Yeah.
yeah, it's scale and it's also talent, right? It's a talented job. Well, who did it? Who is winning? Arizona.
Yeah, we got
Arizona
a
did
bunch of
that.
battery plants now. We've got, Lucid is here. We've got Nikola is here. We have there's a whole chips manufacturer, TSMC. Intel is building a new plant. We have lots of stuff happening in the valley for sure.
Well, it's easy to pick up the New York Times and read articles. There's a community north of Phoenix. I don't remember the name now, but they started to build a community, and now they're having so much trouble with water. They don't know what they're going to do. They can't. There's just not enough water for the houses that they were going to build. Right, so people are trucking water, putting tanks on at their houses, and trucking in water, almost as if you would do it for livestock, in order for them to have water for their houses. And you said, that doesn't sound like a fun lifestyle, but okay, people put up with a lot when the economy's good. You got a
Yeah,
job, things are going well, price your house is going up. You'll put up with some grief, right? You'll put up with some bad traffic in Phoenix, and even when it's 110 degrees in the summer, because the economy is doing well. And so that's the lesson that we want to try to keep in mind here, is that you got to keep these economies growing. The U.S. has got a pretty consistent 2 to 3%. We talk about that all the time. That economies grow at 2 to 3%. The UK is from 2013 up till now is about 1 to 1.5%. Uh, Japan 1%, and as I said, Germany's less than just under 1%. Again,
hmm,
you can tie all this; it directly correlates with population. So let me do a comparison for you. In 2023, here's the number one population of the world is India. Number two is now China. Number three is the United States. Number four is Indonesia. Number five is Pakistan. Number six is Nigeria. Number seven is, oh gosh, I can't even read my own handwriting. Um,
Brazil.
yes, thank you. Thank you. Number eight is Bangladesh, and number nine is Russia, and number 10 is Mexico. Okay. Here's the projection for 2100. Right now, that's a long ways out. I'll grant you that, 75 years out in the future. But they're predicting India will be twice as big as China in population by then, because China is going to get smaller and India is going to keep growing. But imagine that India will be not only the largest country, be twice as big as
That's
China.
crazy.
Nigeria will be third. Number four will be Pakistan. Number five will be the Democratic Republic of Congo
Really
in Africa.
interesting.
Yeah. US will fall to number six. Ethiopia will be number seven. Indonesia number eight. Tanzania in Africa number nine. And number 10 will be Egypt, another African country.
Wow, that's remarkable.
Yeah, so what can we learn from this? Well, one, we have a lot of people in the United States that are, I think, locked in to Christianity as the one and only religion, because we were founded as a Christian nation originally. And there's an awful lot of people I talk to that sort of they don't want to admit it, but they see non Christians as somehow not good. Let me put it that way. And the reality is that if you look at where the population of the world is growing, it's the people that are followers of Islam are by far and away growing at much, much higher rates, while people who are Christian are flat to declining. So the spirituality of the world is changing here. We have, in India itself, Modi, the president of the country, is trying really hard to keep the country a Hindu country. That's where it was 50, 60 years ago. And he's trying to say, I don't want more followers of Islam in my country. And he's making it really difficult on followers of Islam in India, and it's causing a lot of fights, and there's a whole lot of problems going on. But the reality is they're having all the babies. I mean, not saying that Hindus aren't having babies, but I'm just saying the
Yeah.
Islamists are having a lot of children. Look at Egypt. Look at the discussion we're having right now in Gaza. The number of Palestinians that have children in Gaza is so much greater than the number of Israelites having children in Gaza that it vastly outnumbers. So there's far, far more Palestinians in Gaza than there are Israelites. And of course, they're very young. So there's some very
Hmm.
significant implications you're looking forward, saying, okay, if you're going to, are you ready to help grow your business? You have to start realizing, if you're building it all on the basis of, say,
Yeah.
Christian principles, and the reality is that it's not the growing religion. That another religion, Islam, is growing much faster. Are you being open-minded about that? Are you
Yeah,
thinking
and
about
this is actually a really good time to remind our listeners to send me an email, Manny at sparkpartners.com. I'll send you a copy of our Trend Report 2030, detailing the top trends that are really aligning in the world. And all that we are talking about right now, Adam, is in that free document. And it's something just to use as reference. And it's going to force us to get out of our comfort zone if we want to remain relevant and grow. And that we've also, we've talked about this a lot. It takes execution, and we can talk about it all day long, but unless you make the move internally and then in your business, it's not going to happen.
Let me give you another interesting statistic. In the United States, about 15% of the population identify as Black or of African descent. By the year 2035, 1 out of 4 people under the age of 30 will be of African descent. 1 out of 4, a population of the world. That's because of the population growth. Listen to those countries that are having the children
Yeah.
versus the ones that aren't having the children. And many of those countries are Muslim, is the dominant religion. Islam is the dominant religion in those countries. So if you have any kind of a bias against people of African descent, you're going to have a hard time in just 10 years with your hiring policies, with your recruitment policies. You have to start to realize that we're just talking 10 years, 1 decade. The implications of these demographic shifts are pretty dramatic. And it should be affecting how you think about where you live. It should be affecting where you think about where you want to take your business. I was doing just an interview, a meeting with a company, a manufacturing company, about 7, 8 years ago, and I remember them taking in, and they had this really, really nice place where women could bring their children to work. And I asked them, I said, why did you say where women bring children? Why didn't you say where all employees bring their children, including the men? Because I knew right off when the leader said, well, we got this for the women in the workforce, he got a bias. He was automatically making a whole bunch of assumptions that were based upon him being a boomer, right? The second thing I did when I looked at him is I said, this is pretty nice. You kind of caught up to 1990 here. I said, but if you really wanted to attract a good workforce and attract them quickly, you'd have a prayer room. Because followers of Islam, they pray several times a day, and they need to take little breaks during the day and pray. And he just looked at me like I had 2 heads. And he says he couldn't imagine that. And I said, no, you need to not only imagine it, but you need to prepare for it. And in fact, if you accepted that and were excited about that, you could probably attract a lot of followers from Islam that live in some of these countries like Pakistan, Egypt, where they have a need to try to emigrate because it's a poor country and they're trying to grow their economies. But those people were looking for a better life. And if you said, hey, I'll bring them in here and I'll train you. And by the way, here's the prayer room. And by the way, over here's the temple. You could attract your workforce and train it
Right.
up to be very, very successful. So these things are something we should be thinking about today and applying in our business today, because this demographic shift, as much as we're harping on it, is happening very, very quickly. And the boomers are going away. Either they're going out of the workforce. That's what's critical. Doesn't matter if they're dying or not. The critical thing is they're leaving the workforce. Again, dealing with some people in the state of Wisconsin recently, not about a year ago, we're talking about how they were going to support the water supply. And what I mean by that is all the pipes. They have a lot of water in Wisconsin. It's a great advantage to their state, actually, is the amount of clean water that they have and the access to clean water from Lake Michigan and also from wells. But this water has to go through all these pipes. And for years, you had people that worked for the water department. Well, it's one thing if you were born in the 50s or early 60s, but most people born in the 50s ended up with these jobs over the water department, worked for them for 35, 40 years. And
Right.
so now they're going out taking care of this infrastructure. And today they're retiring. And they're saying, okay, I've done this for 40 years. I'm ready to draw my state pension. And the people that run the water departments are looking around saying, well, who are we going to hire to come in and manage these
Dig the
pipes and when things
trenches and
break,
all that.
fix it? Yeah. And also remember, when you work for the water department, it also takes care of the sewage systems. So you've got the municipal sewage system, and then you've got the storm drain system, and you get big storms. These storm drains back up, and you got people who got to go out and work outside in the cold, in the wet, in not very nice conditions, often to put it that way. So how are you going to recruit people to come in and do these kinds of jobs? That's the question. And the reality is that you're probably not. And you have to start to admit that now. You have to start saying, wow, I don't know that I can recruit people to replace the people that had these
Yep.
jobs. How am I going to do more robotics, more automation? How can I get smart tools that can actually perform without having to have human intervention in that system if I'm running a manufacturing plant? I just yesterday heard about a restaurant that opened, and there's not a single human in the restaurant. You literally place the order at a kiosk. The food is prepared by a robot, and then it's given to you by a robot, and you leave. So the whole restaurant is completely automated. Now, that might sound kind of weird, and you might say it's unique, but what I would say is it's white space. It's somebody giving it a real
Yeah,
shot.
it is.
They're experimenting. What works? What doesn't work? What customers do they get turned on by this? Are we attracting young people? You know, how's it going? Can I price better because I don't have to deal with people, and my costs go down because it's robotics instead of people? Do I get rid of costs because I don't have to deal with human issues, problematic
Right.
employees and that kind of stuff? So are we going to see all restaurants that are 100% automated? My prediction is yes. We'll have some. It'll be that way in the future. And we have people experimenting with it now. Why? Because they're already having so much trouble hiring in the hospitality
Hmm.
industry, getting people to come to work. So these are issues I keep wanting to impress on people, small businesses and large. You've got to deal with these demographics and start to deal with them today, because it's not going to be that long before the workforce is going to look so incredibly different that you won't have a choice.
Right.
Many, even you will retire someday.
I hope not, but yes, I know what you mean. I think there's opportunities here, and there's this metric at one time. I'm not sure if it's still valid. About 10,000 boomers leave the workforce a day in the U.S. And
Yeah.
even if it's true or not, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. And that really was to talk about the boomers as a market, but the real, much larger implication is what are they leaving? What industry are they leaving an opportunity or giving you an opportunity to step in? And I
Yes.
think it behooves any business leader, any business owner to really lean in and look at this as a serious opportunity. I mean, it could be a problem if you don't address it, but it could be a massive opportunity because if you're not doing it, I guarantee that your competitors definitely are.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. So we'll put talking about demographics more this year. I'm sure of it, along with artificial intelligence and environmental awareness. But thanks for bringing up the topic, Manny.
Very good, Adam. Have a good week, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Cheers.